And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's January the ninth day of the year. Just 356 days remain till the year's over with, and we'll start a new one. Holidays observances. It is National Word Nerd Day. It's a time for lexophiles to rejoice. People who love words find joy in expanding their vocabulary, playing word games, and creating witty puns. National Cassoulet Day, a French slow-cooked casserole loaded with savory meat, tender beans, and fragrant herbs. Perfect for chilly nights. International Choreographer Day, National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, National Apricot Day, National Balloon Ascension Day. You go to Albuquerque, New Mexico, you can see the Balloon Festival. You know, folks soar high above the landscape in a wicker basket under a colorful canopy of air-filled wonder. It's an adventure like no other. National Australian Shepherd Day, Quitter's Day, National Hockey Mom Day, National Wonk Day, Play God Day. You know, spreading joy is contagious. Brightening somebody else's day with a small gesture can create ripples of happiness in the world. National Static Electricity Day. Ever touch a doorknob and get a surprise shock? That's the invisible jolt that likes to play tricks and keep life electric. And Artis Mundi. Famous people born on this date. The one, the only, Tricky Dick Richard Nixon. The only president that I can think of who's actually resigned. Well, from holidays and observances, let's talk about stories in the news. Well, President Trump says there won't be a second wave of attacks against Venezuela due to their cooperation. He announced early this morning on Truth Social that he's canceled the previously expected second wave of attacks against Venezuela in light of the cooperation between the foreign nation and the U.S. He said Venezuela is releasing large numbers of political prisoners as a sign of seeking peace. It's a very important and smart gesture. USA and Venezuela working well together, especially as it pertains to rebuilding in a much bigger, better, and more modern form. And they're working hard on the oil and gas infrastructure. Because of this cooperation, he said he'd canceled the previously expected second wave of attacks, which looks like it not be needed. However, all ships will stay in place for safety and security purposes. It may wind up being the 51st state, who knows? Well, Renee Good, the woman who was killed trying to run down an ICE agent, Renee Good's wife claimed Minneapolis shooting was her fault on a video amid anti-ICE fury. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has characterized the fatal shooting of a Minneapolis woman by federal agents as an act of domestic terrorism, alleging the driver had been stalking and impeding and blocking ICE officers for hours leading up to the incident. Video from that scene shows Renee Good's wife, Rebecca Brown Good, in distress immediately after the shooting, saying she encouraged Renee to attend the location where ICE agents were operating. And she apparently encouraged her to continue to try to interfere with what they were doing. Well, the DNC joins the Supreme Court voting case. Blast RNC efforts as wholly un-American. Democratic National Committee filed a Supreme Court amicus brief Thursday seeking to counter the Republican Party in a major election law case this year, setting the stage for a high-stakes court clash that could determine the fate of millions of mail-in ballots nationwide. The Supreme Court agreed in November to take up the case, Watson versus Republican National Committee. which centers on the state's ability to count mail-in ballots that are received within 5 days of an election. At issue was a lawsuit filed by the Republican National Committee and Mississippi GOP in 2024 that seeks to overturn a state voting law that allows for counting of late-arriving mail-in ballots that are postmarked on and before Election Day, as long as they arrive within 5 business days of the election. The RNC and state GOP have argued they break with federal voting laws, a point vehemently disputed by other states and the DNC. The main reason the Democrats, I think, filed their amicus brief is because if the Republicans say left, the Democrats say it has to go right. So they're just being obstructionist. Well, an agent has dumped a Washington quarterback trying to break a $4 million contract days after signing. Quarterback Demond Williams Jr. is looking to leave the Washington Huskies shortly after signing a NIL with the program, so his agent's moving on. Doug Hendrickson posted on social media Thursday to explain his situation with Williams. He said, "I made the decision to end my representation of Demond Williams Jr. effective immediately due to philosophical differences." That's according to the Wasserman football president. Demond is an incredible talent. We wish him and his family the best for their future endeavors. You know, if I had signed a $4 million contract, even if it required me to stand on my head in the mud, I'd honor it as long as the check didn't bounce. Well, a naked woman allegedly assaulted a deputy while intoxicated, claiming she was trying to be a mermaid. Louisiana woman's attempt to go for a skinny dip didn't end swimmingly, so to speak. She allegedly attacked a sheriff's deputy responding to a trespassing complaint before finally surrendering to deputies on Tuesday. According to the Union Parish Sheriff's Office, deputies were dispatched in November to residents in the Linville community of Marion after a caller reported a neighbor standing in their driveway screaming and refusing to leave the property despite having been warned previously. When a patrol deputy arrived, authorities said the suspect was found nude and swimming in a pond located on the caller's property. The woman is later identified as Erin Elizabeth Sutton, 41, of Marion. Sutton initially refused to exit the pond or speak with the deputy, telling him she was trying to be a mermaid, according to the sheriff's office. After repeated commands, Sutton eventually exited the pond. Due to cold temperatures, emergency medical services were contacted to evaluate her. She was given a blanket, and the deputy attempted to escort her inside a residence to warm up. At that point in time, she allegedly attacked him. Well, it takes all kinds to make a world. Well, a 550-pound bear was finally evicted from a California home after a bizarre strategy ends a month-long ordeal. This bear had been living underneath a California man's house for over a month, but finally left after a bizarre strategy ended a long streak of failed removal attempts by state officials. Even one of God's anointed came out and ordered the bear to leave, and the bear ignored the judge. Male black bears reportedly removed from the crawl space Tuesday after bear removal experts from Tahoe traveled to the Altadena home. One team member crawled inside and fired paintballs filled with vegetable oil. A wildlife organization, the Bear League, told Fox News Digital on Thursday. Just got a news splash. Renee Nicole Good was part of Ice Watch. That's a group that makes it their mission in life to oppose ICE any way they can. Well, Mandami sides with tenants as New York landlords get crushed by rigged housing laws. New York City Mayor Zoran Mandami is under fire, including from the White House, for his choice of a property rights skeptic and housing justice advocate to head the city's office to protect tenants. Kara Weaver is on record calling home ownership a form of white supremacy and advocating that government seize private property. For the good of everybody, of course. We can hope that such policies will not be implemented, and even in New York, and the Trump Department of Justice has signaled an interest in ensuring that they won't be. That doesn't mean the city lacks a myriad of housing policy problems, largely based on laws that already overprotect tenant rights at the expense of law-abiding landlords. Those not targeted by Mandami and his new rental ripoff tour of allegedly negligent owners. Yes, if you own property and you're white, you're automatically a white supremacist. And my screen just darkened for some reason. There we go. Well, food pyramid faces scrutiny as Ben Carson reveals why Americans don't have to eat meat. The new food pyramid has been flipped on its head with the Health and Human Services officials releasing guidance that prioritizes meat and dairy and vegetables and pushes whole grains to the bottom. Dr. Ben Carson, USDA's National Advisor for Nutrition, Health, and Housing, told Fox News in an interview that dietary guidelines were first proposed in 1980 to inform Americans about healthy eating. The purpose was to educate the populace about nutrient-rich foods, things that are helpful to you and things that are harmful to you. And over the course of time, we deviated from those goals, Carson said. We started rubber stamping all these highly processed foods, these quick things. It's not been good. So they're attempting to change things. Well, the Watchdog Group exposed this taxpayer-funded teacher program for banning white applicants. Said it was likely illegal. A leading education watchdog group released a report this week alleging that a state-funded teaching preparation partnership in Minnesota explicitly limits eligibility based on race, possibly violating federal law. According to a report released by Defending Education, the Minnesota Educators Partnership, collaboration between MSU, Mankato, and several southern Minnesota school districts, operates multiple teacher pipeline programs that are restricted to Black, Indigenous, and people of color applicants, despite being funded with taxpayer dollars through the Minnesota Department of Education. Yes, Minnesota's got a lot of problems, and more of them are coming to light. And if you have the ability to teach, what does it matter what your color is? Well, Raleigh Gaines says unite now or watch the radical left destroy everything we built. She has a YouTube show on called The Raleigh Gaines Show. The week before the 2025 election, Democratic Party's undisputed leader, New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, got a bit sidetracked while campaigning on the trail for the radicals around Mondami in New York City. After simply pointing out how destructive the new radical left is shaping up to be, as a lot of folks did, she decided to rage tweet Gaines for her well-known stance that men shouldn't be in women's sports. Her claim was essentially, if I just slammed faster in college, I'd have beaten the man I was swimming against. Well, part of the problem is AOC, as she likes to be known, looks at things as she did when she stood behind that bar as a bartender. Every single problem in the world can be solved standing behind that bar. The mere fact they don't translate very well to the real world is irrelevant. The mere fact she thinks it means it should happen. Well, as I said earlier, DHS has announced that Renee Nicole Good was part of ICE Watch. She was the mother of 3 shot and killed by a federal agent after allegedly swerving her car toward him. She worked as a Minneapolis-based immigration activist, serving as a member of ICE Watch. She died Wednesday after allegedly moving her car toward agents in what the Department of Homeland Security decided was an act of self-defense. Homeland Security sources told Fox that the group aims to monitor, track, interfere, and oppose ongoing federal immigration enforcement operations. And the group is present in multiple sanctuary cities across the country. Well, there's a picture of her, and what I'm looking at, she doesn't look like a Looney Tune. Well, inside the Sea War to contain the Dark Fleet, there's a lot of news. The U.S. seizure of the tanker formerly known as Bella 1 marks a rare escalation in sanctions enforcement against Russia's so-called Dark Fleet. But experts say the move is unlikely to trigger a broader confrontation of Moscow, at least in the near term. Analysis largely agreed that the interdiction, one of the most direct U.S. actions against a vessel Russia claims was operating under its flag, comes at a moment when the Kremlin has limited appetite for escalation outside of Europe and is focused primarily on its war against Ukraine. Well, former SNL star, that's Saturday Night Live, don't you know, agrees to you shouldn't waste your money supporting Jasmine Crockett. Former Saturday Night Live star Bowen Yang agreed with fellow podcast host Matt Rogers it'd be a waste of money to support Representative Jasmine Crockett, Democrat of Texas, in her Senate campaign. On the pair's Las Caristas podcast on Wednesday, Rogers began a 60-second segment where he'd rant, rail, rave, and hopefully change hearts and minds about cultural topics. During his minute, he criticized Democratic California Governor Gavin Newsom, calling out what he saw as self-centered politicians, including Crockett. Anytime a politician's making it too obvious about themselves, he was already done with them, he said. Don't waste your money sending to Jasmine Crockett. Just do not do it. Well, Border Patrol agent wounded 2 folks in Portland. According to DHS, one of the individuals weaponized a vehicle against them. The U.S. Border Patrol agent shot 2 people in Portland after the driver of a car allegedly attempted to run over the federal officers. The incident occurred at about 2:19 p.m. local time when Border Patrol agents stopped the vehicle and identified themselves as law enforcement. According to DHS, the driver is believed to be a member of the Venezuelan group Trendy Aragua, allegedly weaponized the vehicle and tried to run him over. Fearing for his life and safety, an agent fired a defensive shot. The driver drove off with the passenger, fleeing the scene. DHS said the driver was also allegedly involved in a recent shooting in that city. After the incident, Portland Mayor Keith Wilson called on Immigration and Customs Enforcement to halt all operations in the city until a full and independent investigation could take place. According to Wilson during a news conference, we know what the federal government says happened here. There was a time when we could take them at their word, and that time has long since passed. Well, okay. President Trump has issued a loud, clear warning to Iran. It would seem that he has told them that they can't kill their citizens for protesting. We'll see how that goes. Well, the IRS has announced the start date to the 2026 tax filing season. Free file program opens earlier on January 9th, that's today, for taxpayers with adjusted gross incomes of $84,000 or less. That means you can do your taxes and file them for free with this program. The taxpayers may begin filing their 2025 tax returns on Monday, January 26th, according to the IRS announcement. Give taxpayers more than 2 months to file their returns ahead of the Wednesday, April 15th deadline to file or request an extension until the fall. Well, now I have to go by a local stationery store and pick up my tax program. Well, Nebraska state senator has been caught on video removing founders' portraits from the corner of the state capitol. She defends her actions. She's been caught on video removing portraits of America's founders from a hallway in the state capitol. Democratic State Senator Michaela Cavanaugh was shown on Capitol security footage taking down portraits from an exhibit celebrating the 250th anniversary of America's founding. The exhibit was provided by conservative nonprofit PragerU and included images of signers of the Declaration of Independence and prominent women in American history, according to Governor Jim Pilot, who criticized the lawmakers' actions. According to what he wrote on X, celebrating America during our 250th year should be a moment of unity and patriotism, not divisiveness and destructive partisanship. He said he was disappointed in this shameful and selfish bad example. According to Kavanaugh, she removed the portraits because she believed they violated the rules and regulations of the state capitol and didn't believe they'd been approved. She cited Rule 4.07, which limits display to the first floor rotunda for a one-week period in most cases, and prohibits leafleting within the state capitol or on its grounds. Well, Kate Middleton is going to celebrate a low-key birthday with family after turning a corner health-wise, according to experts. She'll likely receive a personal heirloom and a priceless yet heartfelt gift from King Charles III as she celebrates her 44th birthday. After turning a corner health-wise, according to a royal expert. Down-to-earth princess will be celebrating her birthday at a low-key private family gathering full of love and laughter, according to British broadcaster and photographer Helena Chard. Chard said, having turned a corner health-wise, she's thankful for her personal blessings. Princess Catherine's path and focus is clear, and life is precious. She continues to work and passions with renewed gusto and balance. Well, influencer. That's why I love that, influencers. Tricia Paytas says she's considering 2026 congressional bid to stop that horrible stuff in California. She's released multiple videos over the past week, noting she's considering a run for U.S. Congress in California. She's known for flamboyant and zany content, says in a video filmed in her car. I don't mean it as a joke. I know it sounds crazy, like to me too, but I think it's doable. Really would love to run for House of Representatives. Here in California, we have 52, and I'd really love to run. And she went on to note that they have an election this year, November 3rd, 2026, and I do have some bills I'd like to present to Congress. So I'm working on that. I really want to be able to truly make a difference because I see so much horrible stuff happening in the world, and a lot of it right here in California as well. And I'm like, oh, there's nothing I can do, and she said, well, actually, there's something I can do. I can run. And we'll see what comes of that. Iran's supreme leader says protesters are running their own streets to please President Trump. Iran Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei signaled that security forces will clamp down on protesters after overnight marches through the streets as the country continues to see demonstrations. Overnight, Iran was plunged into a nationwide internet blackout as the anti-regime protests intensified. Blackout severely restricted communications across the country as demonstrators entered their second week, and the death toll reportedly reaches 44. So we'll see what comes of all that. And finally, Bradley Cooper has addressed plastic surgery rumors after getting approached by fans who told him he looks good. He's putting an end to plastic surgery rumors once and for all. 51-year-old actor addressed ongoing speculation about his appearance during the Smart Less podcast, revealing the online chatter has spilled over into his real life. He says, people have come up to me in the last couple of weeks. And like, oh, you look good. You must have had work done. Well, he says no. Okay. We're going to take a break from our normal way of doing this show, where I'll go into whatever the topic is I've been talking about. But for For the rest of the program tonight, though, I want to talk about something I've been immersed in for quite a while. The third volume of a new series called Mysterious Disappearances. Not because it's a book, because of what kept showing up while I was working on it. Actually, that book, which was published yesterday, is actually my 97th published work. Hopefully in the next month or so, I'll hit the magic number of 100. Now, I didn't set out to write multiple volumes about disappearances. I thought it'd be one book, maybe two. But as I kept going, the cases started repeating the same elements, even when they had nothing to do with each other. Now, first, one thing I do want to touch on is how long I have been covering mysteries and why disappearances are different than murders. Now, I've talked about unsolved murders and the lack of closure. A lot of disappearances, you never know what happened to the people. In other words, silence replaces answers. Now, in disappearances, there's no ending. That changes everything. You have no idea what happened to your family member or your friend or your partner. They're just, one minute they're there and the next minute they're gone. Well, in Volume 3 of Mysterious Disappearances, I hit that book because the repetition became impossible to ignore. Now, in Volume 1, we established the phenomena. What are the characteristics of these mysterious disappearances? And in Volume 2, we widened the lens, so to speak. And then, of course, in Volume 3, as I said, the repetition became impossible to ignore. When unrelated cases start behaving the same way, you're no longer dealing with coincidence. You're dealing with a pattern. Now, almost every disappearance has what I call the last normal moment. A phone call, a stop for gas, a drive home that never finishes. Of course, during this time period, nothing appears wrong. There's no distress signals. There's no warning signs. And at some point, the timeline just breaks. Now, searches happen, of course. Sometimes massive searches get underway, especially if it's a child. But somehow, in spite of all our technology and all our ability to track folks, nothing is found. In some cases, they're repeated searches. There are trained teams, there are scent dogs, helicopters. Then months or years later, something turns up in a place that's already been searched. Now, you've got cars found abandoned, and that's one of the most disturbing elements of these cases. Not wrecked, not burned, just sitting there. There was one young lady who was in college. She left to go to her parents' house, and her car was found sitting on the side of the road, all her possessions still in it. Looked like she just stopped and walked away. The keys are found inside. The doors are unlocked, personal items left behind. You know, a car is supposed to tell a story about the driver. But in these type of cases, it just refused to. And even when attempts are made to track folks, such as pinging their phones, the phones will ping right up until they stop. Clothing reappears. Items are found clean after exposure. Now, this isn't evidence, though. This just shows that something odd had happened. It's evidence that reopens them, whether anybody wants that or not. There have been a number of cases I'm familiar with where they've been reopened several times because of various things that are found. The people are never found, but their phone might be found, or some jacket that's identified with them might be found. And when you're doing this type of stuff, tracking people who disappeared, a lot of questions have to be asked, and nobody really likes to ask. Now, there's a big difference between an unsolved case and an unresolved case. In an unsolved case, you never get an answer. In an unresolved case, questions just stop. So while working on the material in Volume 3, I had to confront how often cases are just ended, not solved. There's sort of an institutional silence, I guess you could say. Especially along the border. Volume 3, the subtitle is Borderlands. Now, this is a very odd place. There are jurisdictional gaps. Quite often there's case fatigue. And every new piece of evidence causes massive paperwork. And since resources are somewhat limited, there's always the urge to move on, go to the next case. Silence doesn't mean nothing happened. It means nothing more is going to be said about it. And there's a big, big difference. Sometimes cases are put on the back burner and just left. No more work is done on them. It's not an intentional ending to the case. It's not announced we're ending this case. It's just allowed to happen. Families don't get closure. They get time. More time when their sister or brother or child or partner has disappeared into the great mystery. Birthdays are missed, anniversaries, decades pass, and disappearances stretch grief out forever. There's no closure. You don't know what happened to them. And no matter how you try to solve the case, you can't get what you need. Now, the book is not a collection of theories. In fact, the series is not a collection of theories. It's a documentation of patterns that shouldn't exist, but actually do. Some cases just fade. People quit talking about them. Other cases refuse to stay buried because every time you think you've come to an end, something new pops up. Well, the unfortunate thing about an unsolved disappearance, there's always a question. What happened? Why did it happen? There's one case where a young man joined some friends at a bar. He's seen on security camera coming into the bar, but he's never seen leaving the bar. And it was only one way in or out for customers. So what happened to him? According to his friends, one minute he was there laughing and talking with them, and next minute he was gone. When you've got a situation like that, everybody what ifs. What if you went out this way? What if you went that way? nobody has anything definitive. There have been people who disappeared from their locked homes, and there's never been any sign of what happened to them. They've had people disappear off airplanes, amazingly enough. One minute they're sitting in their seat, maybe dozing. Next minute the seat's empty and nobody knows which way they went. How do you vanish off of a locked up airplane flying across the country? It's questions like that that make doing a series like this so fascinating, because some of the things that are being addressed are absolutely impossible, and yet they happen. Well, if you want to see the series, go to Amazon.com. Once you get there, go to Kindle and look up Ken Hudnall, Kenhudnall. And you'll see many of the 97 that I've published. We've been writing about unsolved murders. One of my favorite topics, of course, is the assassination of President Kennedy. There are so many unanswered questions that it just absolutely boggles the mind. How is it possible for somebody who was not that good a shot to take a World War II rifle and make what many expert marksmen decide is an impossible shot? Now, that wasn't bad enough. Then came all the questions. There's so many unanswered questions about the Kennedy assassination. And then to make it even worse than John Kennedy, you've got Robert Kennedy, the man that was arrested and sent to prison, never got close than 3 feet to his front. And yet, the wound in the back of his head shows powder burns as if the gun had been pressed up against his skull. Sirhan Sirhan had a gun with 6 shots. Later, investigators discovered 8 or 9 bullet holes scattered around that pantry. Then, of course, the 60s were a period when there were a number of related assassinations of people that was causing the system issues. With John Kennedy, he was flying in the face of what the military-industrial complex knew had to take place. He was undermining American security. Then, of course, we've got with Robert Kennedy. He was going to reopen, and he said this many times, John Kennedy's assassination. That couldn't be allowed to happen. So he had to go. Malcolm X. We've got a book on that coming out. And he had, done something unforgivable. He didn't follow party lines, so to speak. The more you delve into these things, the more questions come to light that were actually never asked. Jim Garrison, the district attorney in New Orleans, tried to ask some of those questions. He was offered a federal judgeship to just make the case go away. A lot of strange things came to light. The assassination of the President of the United States is not something that is done simply. It takes planning. And one of the things that was never really gone into was the fact that there were several other locations where there were plans made to assassinate President Kennedy. We're going to be talking about that. You know, from assassinations to unsolved murders to mysterious disappearances, they all have one thing in common. They defy logic. With unsolved disappearances, where did they go? In many cases, how did they go? In the case of the young man in the bar, one minute he's talking to a friend, next minute he's gone. The bar had numerous security cameras, but he just literally vanished off the screen. Now, when you delve into things like mysterious disappearances, it's a subject you just won't let go. There are literally so many possible clues that everybody says to themselves, this can't happen. There's no way he can just vanish. But at the end of the day, none of these clues ever lead to anything. You know, I've been talking about stories like this for, Lord, 30 years. And disappearances are much, much different than murders. With a murder, even if it's unsolved, you've got an ending. With a disappearance, there is no ending. Until that body is found, you know who did it and why. The questions still hover out there. Silence replaces answers. With disappearances, as I've said before, there is no ending. And for me, that changes everything. I want to know why it happened, how it happened, what was the purpose behind it. And in the first volume, we laid the groundwork. It's called, the subtitle of that one is Cases It Wouldn't Settle. With the second volume, we went from a single case to talking about widespread patterns. We widened the lens, so to speak. And now in the third volume, we're talking about repetition that becomes impossible to ignore. Here along the border, there's a lot of unsolved mysteries. And because of the migration movement back and forth across the border, we literally have no idea how many people have vanished. There's one area where, according to law enforcement reports, hundreds of remains have been found. We have no idea who they are, where they were coming from, where they were going to. And their relatives all have no idea what happened to them. In fact, most assume that their missing relative is living the good life in the U.S., being showered with welfare money. Remember, that's the promise that President Obama made. Come up here and we'll give you $50,000 a year. You won't have to work. So, of course, a lot of people beat their feet toward the U.S. border. But somewhere along the line, something mysterious happened. You know, coyotes, folks that help them get to and cross the border. We'll turn them loose in the desert, and many without water, and say the border's that way. And so people start out across the desert, and a lot of this area is desert, folks. No soda machines, no snack bars. They're lucky if they find a ditch full of water. Well, when the unrelated cases start behaving the very same way, you know you're not dealing with a coincidence anymore. You're dealing with a pattern. Now, patterns normally will involve a lot of common factors. But when people don't even speak the same language, that vanish in the same way, there's something more at work than just coincidence. And as I said, almost every disappearance has what you might call the last normal moment. There have been people vanish in the process of making phone calls to relatives. There was one young man who ran out of gas, had a cell phone, called his mother. Could she come get him? And while they were talking, and they were on the phone for over 45 minutes, he suddenly gave an exclamation and the call went dead. When they got to where he was supposed to be, neither he nor his car were there. The car was found 45 minutes later, quite some distance from where he had said he was. Massive search was undertaken. Nothing was ever found. And, you know, when we're talking about searches, as I said earlier, it's not just you and your buddy walking around looking for your friend. I'm talking about serious taxpayer-funded searches. Quite often repeated searches using trained teams of searchers, especially in national parks. Oh man, talk about unsolved disappearances. National parks are places where it amazes you how many people disappeared there. Search dogs are brought in, and they will go back over the same ground they did with just individual searching. Helicopters come in. I remember when I was in South America, we had a couple of folks vanish, and we did searches. We looked under every tree and every bush. And let me tell you, searching in the jungle is quite an operation. In one case, we found the individual asleep under a tree. In the other case, we never found the hide nor hair of him. The two had been together, and according to the one we found, one minute everything was fine, next minute he was by himself, had no clue what happened to his friend. Well, quite often the most disturbing parts of these cases are when you find a car abandoned or you find personal possessions. It makes you really question everything you thought you knew about your friend. Especially with the cars. Usually, in these type of cases, as I said before, the keys are inside, the doors are unlocked, personal items are still in the car. Why would somebody just walk off and leave everything? Absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. Well, the sad thing is, at a certain point, the organizations that we believe are there to help us and keep us safe actually turn their back on the people who disappeared. They will classify cases as an intentional disappearance. We're not going to waste more resources. I mean, there's any number of excuses that'll be used by the searching organization to bring the case to a close. And whether the case is unsolved or unresolved, the end result's the same thing. Searching stops. And if you try to bring it, especially when the family goes to see the agency in charge of the search, there's certain stock answers they get. Well, we searched to here, and there's a jurisdictional gap, and we can't search any further, especially here along the border. Or there's case fatigue. Man, we've done everything we know to do. We don't know what else to do. Or paperwork. Oh, that's my favorite one. Well, we had a form that gave us some information, but the form has disappeared. We can't find it. So without that information, we can't search anymore. And do you think your friend or your child or your partner is the only case we have to deal with? There are dozens more. We can't waste any more time on this. And besides, we think it's probably an intentional disappearance. Silence doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means we're not going to work on it anymore. Which, of course, leads to a lot of human cost. And there was one case in a national park I was reading about the other day. Massive search team searched for a week. And then the body was found by a hiker in an area that had been searched numerous times. So how did that happen? And that's not just once in a while. That is quite often you find that happening. Sometimes those searches turn up things that boggle the mind. One particular case, it was a hiker they were looking for, an experienced hiker. His backpack was found sitting under a tree, pristine condition, and this is after weeks of searching. At a certain point in time, you do have to come to an end place, at the same time keeping your eye out for anything that might turn up. I'm probably going to do one more on the Mysterious Disappearance series. When you start talking about the Borderland, well, you may think, well, it's open desert. How can somebody disappear there? Well, there are more mysteries in the Borderland than literally any place else. There was one case I was talking to a law enforcement officer about it. I said, you ever had any completely unsolvable disappearances? He said, man, all the time. They'll find the car sitting on the side of the road. Still has gas, still runs. But the people are gone. And it may be one person, it may be 5 people. One case, there were 5 hunters. These are armed, experienced hunters. Literally disappear. And there are things in the desert. If you've never wandered the desert, you'll be amazed at what you'll find. They look pristine, but they may have been there for years. Well, If one case I was reading about, getting ready to do a write-up, the young man, and he was in his 20s, vanished. And his only relative was his elderly mother. And she couldn't be running down to the police station every other day asking for what was going on. And when there's no pressure, slowly that case gets moved further and further to the back burner. It's not that they intentionally quit looking. There's no incentive to keep looking. He was never found. And in fact, at last I heard, the case was still open, but there's no work being done on it. You know, series like Mysterious Disappearances raises questions that, of course, are uncomfortable for the powers that be. And is it going to solve anything? Well, if it brings it to the forefront of people's minds and they see something that they realize is tied into what I wrote about, it can have an impact, yes. Well, on that note, we've come to the end of today's show and the end of the week. Monday, we'll go back talking about conspiracies and other bizarre things. You know, sometimes mysterious disappearances actually have a connection to a conspiracy. But we'll never know if nobody keeps looking. So until Monday at this time, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great weekend and try not to disappear. And I suggest you go to Amazon and get Mysterious Disappearances. There's 3 of them. I think you'll find your view of the world, it changes after you read them. So until Monday, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great weekend.